Welcome to Invisible, Breaking Through the Stigma of Addiction. I'm your host, Dean Anderson, and on today's show, we have Melissa Armstrong. Melissa is a coach and a mindfulness teacher. Thank you for being on the show, Melissa.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm thrilled to be here.
It's our pleasure. We love to talk to people about addiction and all the things that go along with it, and we think that you're going to be a wonderful example of sharing your experience on today's show. So I would like to start right out of the gates of you just kind of talking to me a little bit about what it is that you do and how coaching and mindfulness play a role in kind of why we would have you on the show today.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I am super interested in helping folks with their inner experience. So their thinking, their emotions, how they feel in their bodies, and really helping folks primarily in addiction recovery to feel unstuck, to be able to sort of work through the past and to be able to really transmit a confidence and a positive energy in their lives. And I bring mindfulness in often because it's been a practice that has been so helpful for me to just learn to thrive, to be able to relax, to be able to manage my inner experience.
Stuck. That word stuck in my head when you said the word stuck. What does that mean so much to you when you hear people being stuck? Because it's something I deal with all the time and hear all the time.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think we can become stuck in stories that we tell either about our lives or about who we are. Mm-hmm. We can just feel like we're caught in, this is how I was, this is how I'll always be. Or we can get stuck in negative emotions or guilt, shame, ruminating. And so I think that when we get stuck in typically those negative places, it can feel like a little bit of a prison. It can feel like there's no way out. This is how I always will be. So that's what stuck means to me.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I see a sense of talking with individuals from the perspective of letting them know that they aren't who they were. They are who they are. And people get stuck in the idea of who I was is who I am. And then that kind of keeps them stuck in the incapacity to move forward. Because if I'm locked into that identity, there's no way I could possibly be different or better.
Totally. And it's like it really does become a sense of identity, right? It's who I am. And I think we might not realize it is possible to change. We might sort of have a negative viewpoint on that, like, this is who I am, this is who I'll always be. People don't change, right? And sometimes we just need to kind of be given the message, you can trust that you can become more adaptable, flexible in your life.
When you say trust, do you mean, elaborate on that for me. Elaborate on what you mean by trust. You can trust.
Well, I think about like trust versus doubt or skepticism. And if we're kind of stuck on the side of skepticism, it's just like, kind of caught in that rumination, right? Where trust is just sort of like faith, hope, belief that something might change. And it can just come from sort of opening our mindset a little or seeing people who are a little further down the path who are like, just trust me, this can change. Your whole life might change in a day, might change in a year. But it's like seeing those examples, and it's just sort of that feeling, trust is sort of like just being open as opposed to closed down, you know?
Do we see it, that addiction being people's kind of stuck, I'm going to use the word stuck again, stuck in survival mode, and that lack of trust would perpetuate that, right?
Yeah. I think about addiction as being like a strategy that we use. We might not think about it as a strategy when we're in it, but it's like we're all just trying to survive in the world and cope. And so addictions can be helpful in the sense that it's like, I don't have to feel my feelings. I don't have to feel the stress. I can shut down. So it's a strategy. It's just that it's also hurtful, right? It comes with harmful behavior. We feel worse about ourselves. We engage in behaviors that might harm other people. But addiction is this strategy that some of us use because we're just trying to survive. I think that's the way I try to look at it, because I feel like it's sort of open to look at it that way. It's more compassionate than kind of shaming and blaming people.
I'm hearing what you're saying, and I'm right on board with that. Go back to the trust part. So we're not just talking about trusting in kismet or that the future or something, fate is going to work things out. there's also a part of it that you're talking about trusting ourselves is what I'm kind of picking from that. There's a part where we need to trust that my coping mechanisms were what they were and I can change.
Yeah, yes. And that can be like a whole new territory, right? If we've never really trusted ourselves or we've been down on ourselves. But it's true, trust can feel sort of like destiny, but it's also just really practical. If I just take the next action, what's like the most helpful action I could take next? I kind of see the results. Oh, things are going a little better, right? It's sort of trusting in action. It's trusting in taking the next step also.
So with that reflection, we're kind of talking about the one step at a time and doing things in bits and pieces and taking little chunks of that to build that trust. How do you see how that's counterintuitive in the idea of everyone wants the solution right now?
That's such a good question. Yeah, what comes up for me when you say that is it's work. Like, we want to be like, everything changes like this. And I think that steadily doing the work in recovery, when we've done work over time, maybe a period of months, we can look back and be like, whoa, like my life has really changed. But there's sort of no shortcut, I think, is what I feel, right? Like that it's not just going to change radically. Everything's going to be perfect. Maybe it'll never be perfect. It could be really different, better. And it really comes through our actions.
That those actions certainly start to build trust because that's how we do it, right? We can't learn how to trust. We have to take action and then trust builds itself through the process of doing it. So I can see where that's, really relevant in the idea of building trust. But you had mentioned work. And I think what ends up happening is we talk a lot about it. And I hear it in the recovery world all the time. People saying, have a program, do the work, take the actions. But most people are like, what does that even mean? Like, what's the work? I'm living life. Like, what is the work? Yeah. Right? So what does that mean to you, the work?
Yes, it's true, because it can become just sort of abstract, right?
It becomes convoluted and messy, and it's just like, what does that even mean?
Literally, what should I do differently?
Yeah, I want a guide. I want to open it up and say, I do this plus this, and that equals that, and then I'll be better. But people go, no, it's just the work, and it just gets kind of tossed out there. What does that mean to you as a coach and a mindfulness teacher?
The banner of the work, totally.
Right. Yeah. And it's like, okay, and that becomes overwhelming. That's not, incremental like we're talking about. That turns into this big, broad, messy thing that we can't fix.
Yes, it's not possible. Then it can feel like, well, I think we could ask ourselves questions like, where am I stuck? Like, where do I feel stuck? Do I feel stuck in an old story I'm telling myself about who I am? Do I still feel like I'm dragging around old emotions that I haven't resolved? How well do I cope with stress versus not? So this is where I come back to the inner experience, because we can sometimes sort of look out at the world and forget, like, we're living in a body mind, and this is the thing we have to work with and take care of. So asking ourselves, well, how did I get myself into this situation to begin with? Sort of going back, kind of looking at the past to sort of understand ourselves. Where have we been and why? Where are we now? And then what are the most important aspects of our lives that we need to focus on or do the work around? And it's not just the external environment, it's how we feel. Are we able to notice our emotions in our bodies? Are we able to name them? Are we able to press the pause button when we start to feel super activated or triggered? That was a big one for me in my recovery. So those pieces of work, I think, are the pieces of work I'm the most interested in around, can I learn to work with my body mind so I'm friendly towards myself? I'm not an enemy and angry at my thinking or not understanding my overwhelm, that kind of thing.
So the work is subjective and unique to each individual. And there requires a level of self-awareness in order to be able to notice where the work needs to be done, because it's subjective. And there also needs to be some sort of courage or capacity to be able to, well, you said it's harder to look at. I can't change it if I can't look at it. So partially a level of acceptance and understanding of that. Yeah. That's what I just picked out of all of that. Sounds right.
Yeah, it's like really self-acceptance, I think, is so huge. Really just being okay with, this is my life, this is how it is. Trying to just relax around it. It's okay. And we don't have to do everything. Everything can feel really overwhelming, but what are the most important things to focus on? And I think what you're saying about courage and trust is so important. Like, it seems to me that bravery is an action. We don't think about being really brave and it's like, I'll prepare myself to be brave for 6 months, then I'll do the thing. It's sort of like just working up enough courage to just move into action. And then moving into action gives us the experience. It gives us data to look at, right? Yeah.
I think the way I reflect on that is I can see that akin to motivation. And I think a lot of people assume that motivation is the sky opens up and all of a sudden a bright light comes down and I'm motivated and whoopa whoopa and I'm just, I'm going to go do this thing. And what I recognize is it's not that. It's usually me taking incremental steps towards something. And then as I start taking those steps, motivation builds upon that, right? And I think that we use more of this idea of deficiency motivation, where if I am a piece of garbage, I'll be motivated to push myself forward. If I'm hard on myself, that will propel me, this rock bottom mentality that we have that just wants to keep pushing people down, and then maybe that will get them to bounce back. That deficiency motivation is going to get them to move forward in some incremental, instant gratification way. And the reality of it is that's not going to lead you forward. It's what you said. It's that tiny bits of action that create the courage or the motivation to move forward to get us into that space.
Totally. And it makes me really think about how important social support is, whatever that looks like for us. Like trying to do recovery alone would be a very tough journey. But having people around us who can encourage us, tell us, you might be feeling terrible today, but you can do this. Like sometimes we need someone else who's more encouraging than we can be for ourselves. And just believing like, maybe it is possible for me to change. And what do I want now? What do I want next? Do I want to go back into my old habits? What are the habits that I want to build? And what comes up for me as well when you're speaking is I have 10 years of recovery, and still when I wake up in the morning, I'm like, I'm a little moody in the morning, you know, I'm just like, I'm like, this is just the pattern of how I wake up and how my body is. In spite of that, I can still get up and do my practices and do the things that I know are good for me. And I know that sounds cheesy, but it's just how it is. It's just how it is for me to work with myself. So it's not always that I'm like, yes, let's get it. Let's get after it. I kind of don't have that in me, but I know from giving myself the experience, just get out of bed and get moving, you know? And then everything will move forward. I won't be locked in this feeling all day. It's just like the first half hour.
So getting to know yourself and your own routine and more acceptance, more ideas of just saying, you know what, there's going to be things that I don't have the capacity for, and that's okay, right? So even compassion, some self-compassion.
Yeah, totally. In my early recovery, I became really acquainted with how much I did not like myself. I was kind of shocked. I felt very bad about myself. I was like I really just look in the mirror and I'm like so upset with what I've become. And I'd hear people say, just love yourself. And I was like, what? How do I do that? I'm like, these people don't get it, you know? They're just so happy all the time. I was so and cynical. I really felt badly about myself. But in my first few years of recovery, I started to develop a much friendlier relationship with myself through going to support groups, practicing mindfulness and other things. And I started to see, I actually really like myself now. It's a journey. I don't know that we just flip right away, but compassion, I think self-compassion comes through like treating yourself nicely, treating yourself as your own friend, the way you would do for other people, you know?
Thank you so much. We're going to take a break and we're going to come right back with Melissa Armstrong, and she's going to share more about her lived experience. And it sounds like she's got some great stuff for us. So we'll be right back after this break. Welcome back to Invisible, Breaking Through the Stigma of Addiction. On today's show, we have Melissa Armstrong. So Melissa, right before the break, you were very openly and vulnerably sharing some of your lived experience and the idea of having 10 years of sobriety yourself. If you're comfortable, I would love if you could share with our audience a little bit about that journey and what got you to where you are today.
Yeah, for sure. So I primarily drank a lot, and I can look back now and say I was very anxious and I got overwhelmed anytime I got stressed. And so drinking just helped me kind of shut things down, calm things down. Or I thought I was partying, sort of both. I was just like, drinking is fun. And I used it to just not have to feel anything, not have to feel overwhelmed. I can see that now, but things just got progressively worse for me, which I think is common for people, where it's like some invisible line gets crossed. I was drinking, I thought I was just partying, to drinking excessively all the time. Every morning I would wake up and say, I'm not going to drink today. And then by the end of the day, you can guess what was happening. And that just went on. And so things just kept getting progressively worse. I really hated myself. I really would say, oh, I'll take little breaks. It was never possible. I felt like I was trying to hold my life together and hold down a job and just keep it together. And I felt like my drinking was sort of creating cracks and all that. And I got to the point where I was like, maybe I'll just let this all go, because I love drinking. I love drinking. I can't imagine ever quitting. It's the center of my life. And even though it was harming me and my relationships, I couldn't imagine quitting. And in the last year or so of my drinking, I remember going online and doing the quizzes to be like, are you an alcoholic? And I would always pass. It would be like, you definitely have a problem with drinking. And I'd be like, oh. So I was doing these things to sort of figure myself out, but I still couldn't really admit this is a problem. I couldn't imagine actually quitting. And in that last year, I remember walking around the world being like, I need a sign. The world needs to give me a sign. I'm not doing well. And I walked into a bar. This is true. I walked into a bar and there was a sign on the wall that said, if you're looking for a sign, this is it. And I was like, in that moment, I was like, I think I need to quit drinking. I think that's the sign. And I started to really admit to myself, this isn't good. And I would try, and I wasn't able to quit. Finally, one morning I woke up with my bazillionth hangover, and I looked in the mirror and I was like, I can't believe how much shame I feel. I think this shame will kill me. I just couldn't imagine that feeling for the rest of my life. I'm like, is this all it is for me? And I think it was that feeling of just being like, I can't imagine. What if I live like this for the rest of my life? This is horrific. And somehow that just flipped things. And I started to ask for help. And it's been 10 years now, and I did a lot of different types of work and therapy and 12-step groups and meditation and lots of other things. And many people have helped me. I've not been able to do this alone. And now 10 years has passed. That's kind of crazy, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I heard you say there's an invisible line. That one of the sayings is, you don't know you have an addiction. It's like being in a prison that you don't know you're in until you try to get out.
Yeah.
And it's like that. But I also hear that there's two different levels of that. You hear there's an invisible line I crossed, and I did some online tests that said that those were true, that I was locked in, but it still took a while to get out.
Yeah.
You know, what do you think is the difference between knowing that there's an addiction and making the change for healing? Like there's a gap there that a lot of people are living in right now that I think is really dangerous, and it's really hurtful, because I know there's a problem, but I'm not doing anything about it. So for you, what was the catalyst? How did that play out?
Well, about 6 months before I finally quit for good, I stopped drinking for 6 days. I never stringed together more than 12 hours or something. But I didn't drink because I'd had an episode. I can't remember what now. Something bad happened drinking related. I didn't drink for 6 days. And I was like, I guess I got this. And then I drank every day for the next 6 months. And it's not really funny, but it's just sort of darkly comical, But in those 6 months, I would do things like I would write down all the physical symptoms I was experiencing. It's like I have a headache all the time. I have a stomach ache. I wake up in this fog. I wake up not remembering. So I was sort of noticing all these things that were happening to me. But it's really hard to give it up because it's like my primary coping mechanism. So I really do feel for people. So I was sort of in that. I know I have a problem. I don't know how to do it. Alcohol is my best friend. I hate alcohol. And I think it was that day waking up and just being so in touch with this profound shame. I was like, is this it for me? Is this all my life is going to be? And I think because I had been considering it and mulling it over and every day for months being like, today will be the last day I drink, and that never happening, it was almost like I just got so sick of it, sick of the shame, sick of just being in this prison of negative emotions, being very paranoid. I noticed about 7 days after I'd stopped drinking, I was talking to somebody and I noticed I was like doing this and I was like, wait, I haven't been drinking. And I'm like, I was doing that all the time. I would always be paranoid that people would figure it out because I was such a closeted drinker. So I just started to see all these signs. It's weird. Recovery can be weird because it's like this culmination of events. It can be kind of different for everyone. But just that negative feeling about myself over and over and over just finally culminated in, I was like, I've had it with living this way. Didn't make it easy.
Did you have a knowledge of what it could look like? I mean, because I see that most people, there is that negative side, the shame, but if there's not a capacity to recognize and see that there's something to go towards, most of us in addiction will just stay in that shame. We'll just stay in what's comfortable opposed to moving forward. Was there something that was a catalyst that you were able to see like this could be different? Was it the 6 days that you had in the past, or?
It's such a good question. And, I didn't really know a lot of people in recovery. And I felt when I was still actively using, like, alcohol's just everywhere. And so I really had this story of being like, everyone drinks. How could I stop drinking? Because everyone does it. It's literally the social thing we do in our society. So I didn't really have a lot of examples. And I think you're making such a good point because why we're talking now are to normalize the fact that people go through this. But I immediately was like, what do I do for help? And I found a therapist and I went to the therapist and she was like, you should try a 12-step meeting. And I was so terrified to do that. But I was like, she says it's a good idea. And then I was like, but am I one of those guys? And I went to the first meeting and I almost didn't go. I was terrified. And I was standing outside the meeting crying. And this person walked by me and he's like, are you looking for the meeting? It's in here. And I'm like, how does he know I'm looking for the meeting? I'm literally standing outside crying. That's how he knew. It's like, it's not that hard to figure out. But I was like, how does he know?
One of those things we can laugh at now.
Right.
Sure.
And I went so it wasn't really till then that I started to hear other people's stories. That's why I think social support is so important, no matter what it looks like for you in your own recovery. Because when I heard other people's stories and people seemed to be doing well in this meeting, I was like, oh, these people seem really happy. I felt so unhappy, but I was like, not only are they saying they're alcoholics, but like they seem well now. And that gave me a ton of faith that just maybe something could be different for me.
Pain is often the catalyst to change. It's just not sustainable. So you had that pain and that suffering of I can't stay here anymore, but then you're able to find some professional help and some connection and some individuals and some people that could help provide some forward motion and some hope. That's what I'm picking up from that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm so grateful because I know I've said it already, but I can't imagine if I was stuck trying to figure this out in so much shame that I didn't want to tell anybody. I don't know how I would have figured it out because left to my own devices, I don't know that I could have, but just being able to ask for help. I was embarrassed to ask for help because I was like, do I have to go do this stuff now? But I had given myself so much experience of how addiction was not working for me anymore that I was like, maybe I'll just be willing to try something different, you know?
Right. I see that there's this cycle of shame where we have a recognition of my addiction and I go, I have an addiction, I know I have an addiction. And then we start drinking and we note down all the things that are wrong with addiction, but then I'm trying to solve an emotional problem with a logical solution by pointing it out that, hey, I shouldn't do this and it's bad and it doesn't hurt me, it's not good for me, and I've done all the tests, I know all the things. How does that contribute back to the shame?
Yeah, it's like, what's the story we're telling ourselves?
Yeah.
What is the story we're giving ourselves?
Yeah.
It's true. This is not just a logical, rational problem. And I think that one of the things that has been so foundational for me was learning meditation, learning mindfulness meditation, because it started to get me in touch with just how repetitive my stories were, my thinking was. I sort of felt like I was surrounded by overwhelm, but I was like, oh, these feelings are inside me. So being able to learn to sit with that, calm myself down, started to like break down the shame. Talking to other people about my story and hearing other people's stories also was like a shame breaking down of shame. And that's important because there's still a lot of stigma out there. We can take the stigma in and we can be like, there's a problem with me because I have addiction. That's not the case at all.
I think you're spot on. You know, that awareness, the observation, the acceptance of where I'm at and who I am, gives me the capacity to break down some of that shame, which is pretty great. I think that addiction is a lot of it is avoidance. So we're running away from things. And the capacity to sit silently with myself is the opposite. It's telling me I'm okay and I don't need to avoid, right? We are quickly running out of time, so we got a little bit left. If you can give one quick word of advice to our viewers at home, what would it be?
It would be, wherever you are, it's okay. It's okay to be where you are. We don't have to make the place we are in life wrong. We just allow ourselves to be where we are. It opens it up. It opens up possibility.
Awesome. Thanks, Ilsa. Thanks for being on the show. Thank you for watching Invisible, Breaking Through the Stigma of Addiction, and we'll see you next time.